There are certain elements that find their way into so many things that we see today. Posters and ads, all kinds of places. And that is a simple thing called the film strip. It's used, especially with the Academy Awards, it's all over the place. And here in Times Square is no exception. We're going to zoom into a little area right here where we see a film strip right there. These little Game Boy boxes have a film strip as part of their decoration. Let's look at that film strip by itself. Here's one of the boxes for the shark's tail. And you see that it has a film strip. If we look at the layers for this, we see that that film strip does appear at a very specific spot. So we'll click on here, and there it is, film strips. And we look at it, and that's what it looks like. And on top of that, there's little sides, and there's the pieces inside, and so on. Here it's kind of broken up, but what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple of other places where I have had to use film strips. Like, for instance, there's a couple of ads that I did. This one here was a billboard that had to be done. There you can see film strips pouring out of this element here. And then a really old thing that I did for the Monkees, a book about the rock group the Monkees, and I had a film strip right there. Very simple little film strip. That's what we're going to do now is we're going to create a film strip. Now, creating the film strip is just a question of going in there and using your pen tool to create the basic shapes. Now, I'm going to use the primitive tool right here, which creates paths. Use the rounded rectangle and make sure it's set to paths, which is right there, that second one. This will create a shape layer. This will create a filled shape. This is what we want, the paths, so we can manipulate those. Now, I got the rounded corners. I'm going to just create one right here, and I see that this is pretty big rounded corners. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this down. Let's bring this down to, say, maybe 10. Let's see what that's going to look like. That's better because that's the shape that I want. So I'm going to go in here and create one right there. And this is that little area along the top, the little thing that holds on to those little ridges that rotate the film in the camera. Right? So now I'm going to duplicate this. I select it with this tool and holding down my Option key, Alt on the PC, I'm going to drag it over and hold down my Shift key to constrain it after the fact and just drag it over right there to create that second one. Then I'm going to go in there. I'm releasing the Shift key for a second, click and drag, and pull it over to create another one. I'm going to continue that same step quite a few times until I got the entire top section filled with those little guys. Now I'm trying to get as equidistant as possible. And frankly, this is one of those places where Illustrator does a much better job. Once I'm done with this, let me just go in here and do all these guys. And the last one right there. Now, why Illustrator? Well, let's go look at Illustrator. The beauty of doing it in Illustrator is that in Illustrator I can create one shape right there. And then when I do that copy, again, Option key and Shift, the same two keys, and I drag it over where I want, right there like that. Then all I have to do is go over to my transform again, Command D, and it does it. See, it does a whole bunch of them. I only had to copy one and then transform again, created all the ones in between. We don't have that function working the same way in Photoshop, so I had to go and create all those individual pieces, which I can now grab them all, Option, drag them down, Shift after the fact, and then there's the ones at the bottom. Put them right about there. That's good. So now I'm going to get my little rounded corner guy again, and I'm going to draw the actual strips. Now here, I'd like to have a little more of a round edge. So I'm going to increase this down, break this up to maybe 20. Let's see what that's going to look like. That's better. See, so now I got this bigger shape right in there. I'm going to drag that right about there and copy that over so I have three of them. Right there and another one there. So there's all my basic shapes. I'm going to center these a little bit. Just going to drag them over a little bit. There we go, so that they're centered above all our little guys right there. Now, the final thing I'm going to do is create the actual piece of plastic, right? The cellulite. So I'm going to go in here and get my regular rectangle tool. I'm going to just draw a big shape right across here like that. Now, there's all my basic shapes which are going to make up my film strip. So we go to our path and make sure we save that, because right now it's a work path. Let's save it. Okay, now we're going to go in here and start to create our film strip. So I'm going to go in here and I have a picture which I'm going to use as the elements inside that little film strip. We'll get to that one later. I'm going to create a layer on top here, which I'll call strip. I'm going to select this outer box, the main one way out there, and I'm going to bring my colors to black and white. And in that layer called strip, I'm going to go ahead and fill that path with black, like that. Now I'm going to select all these little guys. Now, if you want to make this fast, you could just draw a marquee across it like that, and then shift the marquee across them like that. Now, you notice that we've also selected this one. So with the shift key still pressed, I'm going to click on that outside one, which will deselect it. So now only all those little guys are selected, which I'm going to take that selected paths and say, make them a selection. Then I'm going to deselect the paths, no more paths selected. And in that layer, that strip, I'm going to hit my delete key, backspace on a PC, and it's going to delete all those little guys right from the film strip. There we go. So now I can deselect it. In a new layer, I'm going to call cells. Get my paths. I'm going to select those 3 paths that make up the cells right there, like that. And in a new layer, that's that layer with the cells, I'm going to go and fill those. Now, it doesn't matter what color I'm using. I got black right now, so it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to go in there and fill them. When we look at our layers, there it is, right in there. So now, here's the picture. So what I'm going to do is, let's turn off the paths. I'm going to take that picture, and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees clockwise, right there. Bring it over into this area right here. Let's turn off the thing in the back. I'm going to clip it with the cells, just like that. So now I can see where it is, and I can just kind of center it right inside there like that, which I'm now going to duplicate it straight across. So I have a second one and a third one. Turn these guys back on, and there we see that we now have the film strip that has all the elements in place. Now, in case I ever want to change this, what I want to do is I want to go in there and merge all these layers together so I can start to give this a little more dimension, and maybe even distort it if I want to. So what I want to do now is I'm going to turn off my background layer, and with all of these guys visible, I'm going to hold down my Option key, Alt on the PC, and say Merge Visible, which is going to merge them all into a single layer, as you see right there. So now, I'm going to turn these guys off. I don't need to see those. And put my background back on. And now I have my film strip, which I can now start to manipulate. So one thing I could do is, let's give it a little depth. So I'm going to go in there and duplicate that layer. And the one in back, I'm going to lock the transparency for it. And I'm going to pick a different color. Let's pick a light gray like this. And with that layer locked, I'm going to say fill with the foreground color. And now that it's filled, I'm going to go in there, and with my move tool, I'm going to move it over to the left a little bit and down. And there you can see that we have now established a little edge to our film there. Now these little corners here, you might want to be a perfectionist and make sure that those little corners are closed off. To do that, I'm going to unlock the transparency, get real close to this, and then just create a little section right there. And you can do it with many different ways. I'm going to take my lasso tool, make sure there's no feather. I'm just going to connect from here to there and fill it with that same gray color. And there you can see that now we established that nice little edge. Do it to the other corners and so on, and it'll be just the way you want it. So now I'm going to take this and merge down. So now they are one piece, which I can now start to manipulate this even further. So I'm going to go in there and do a little distortion on this thing by warping it a bit. So I'm going to go in there and I'm going to just kind of drag this guy over, this guy down. Now, you notice how it's starting to stretch out? That's because this became real narrow here. So I want to make sure that these things pretty much stay fairly equidistant to each other so that they bend the way they should. I'm going to grab this guy and bring him up, and this guy way up here like this. And again, I got to manipulate these handles so that I'm going to maintain the integrity of the basic shape of my film strip. So I'm grabbing the points and I'm just kind of moving this guy around just like so until I have just the shape that I want, just like that. It could be a little off the image if you want. It doesn't matter. There's our film strip. It's nice and bent and twisted and so on. Then to add a little more drama to this, I can go in there and give it a little drop shadow. So now it's got a drop shadow, increase the distance if we want, and so on. But I'm going to take that a step further. Now that I got that drop shadow, I'm going to say layers, layer style, create layer, so that my drop shadow is a separate layer. So I can now take that drop shadow, and let's pull back a little bit. You can see everything we're doing here. I'll take that drop shadow layer, and I'm going to go in there and just say, give it a little regular distort. I'm going to drag it down here, like so. Drag this over, this guy in, just like that. And I'm going to blur it a little bit. I'm going to go in there and say, give it a little Gaussian blur just to soften it up. And bring down the opacity just a tad. So now we have this shadow down there. We see that we have this really cool little film strip that we created by just adding a couple little paths and then manipulating those paths to give us our final effect.